Sweet promises given to all who believe.
Welcome back to Bible Talk class. We are looking at the second part of the third phase, which is the authority, inspiration, and language. And here we are focusing on an introduction to textual criticism, translation, and hermeneutics. Now, textual criticism is a method used to determine the exact wording of the original writing. Before the introduction of printing press about 1450, all books were copied manually, hence manuscripto. So manu means hand, scripto means written, so manuscripts. So all the words we find in scripture were first written by hand or with hands. Particularly with the biblical books, many copied for various reasons. Today we have thousands of copies of the Old Testament and New Testament. The Old Testament text was originally written in Hebrew language and some few portions in Aramaic. The Hebrew text was originally written in consonants. Apart from the Hebrew text, there were several versions of the Old Testament text such as Greek, Latin, Syriac, and Aramaic. There are several manuscripts of the Old Testament text. And so after the text was written in Hebrew, several versions emerged. In other words, several translations were done. And so we have Greek, Latin, Syriac, and also Aramaic. Now, we are looking at textual criticism, how to establish the original wording of the text in the Hebrew Bible. Sources of textual information. To be able to establish the original wording of the Hebrew text or a passage in the Hebrew text, you must know the manuscript that you have to consider to be able to achieve that. And the first manuscripts that we are aware of comes to us from the medieval times. And so we call a host of them, a host of manuscripts, medieval Hebrew manuscripts, because they were prepared or copied between AD 500 and 1000. The first manuscript that has come to us is called Leningrad or Codex B19A, dated 1008, and it contains the entire Old Testament. We also have another manuscript called the Cairo manuscript, dated 895, containing former and latter prophets. We also have Aleppo Codex. Codex simply means book, like a book. Also dated 930, containing the entire Old Testament, but mutilated now. Some portions are no more. They are lost. Okay? And so the Aleppo manuscript is not complete. If the Leningrad is complete. Now, the Masoretes, these were Jewish people who decided to prepare these medieval manuscripts. Hence, we call the Hebrew manuscripts that they prepared, put together between this period I've shared with you, the Masoretic texts. And so, the Hebrew Bible we are using today, from which translations have been, several translations have been done, that Hebrew Bible is called the Masoretic text because those who prepared were Jews and are identified as Masoretes or Masoretes. The second source of textual information is manuscripts coming from the Judean desert, the Qumran community, 150 BC and AD 68. Now we have scrolls of Isaiah, Samuel, Jeremiah, Habakkuk, and Psalm in the Qumran community, fragmentary manuscripts in Masada and Wadi Murabat and Nahal Hiva. So we have the date here so that you appreciate when these manuscripts were prepared by these people living in the Judean desert. So that's the second source of textual information for Old Testament textual criticism. The third source of textual information for Old Testament textual criticism is the Samaritan Pentateuch. This manuscript is dated around 250 BC. When you compare this manuscript with the MT, the Masoretic text, the Samaritan Pentateuch has about 6,000 changes. The fourth source of textual information is versions. We have Greek versions of the Hebrew, for example, the LXX, the Septuagint, prepared or translated between 250 and 150 BC. We have also Aquila, we have Theodosian, we have Symmachus. These were Greek versions of the Hebrew. And we have other versions, okay? So other versions, Latin, Syriac, and Aramaic, Targums, and other quotations in the writings of rabbis and the church fathers. So these versions are also part of the sources of textual information for Old Testament textual criticism. Printed editions of Old Testament. These are not sources. These are only printed editions of Old Testament we have even today. First edition of the Hebrew Bible was printed in 1488. Second Rabbinic Bible, 1524 to 25. And a Biblical Hebraica, 1937. And Biblia Hebraica Stuttgartensia, 1967 to 77. Note here that both the 1937 and 1967 to 77 editions were based on the Leningrad manuscript. And so because Leningrad manuscript contains the entire Old Testament, our present Old Testament is based on the Leningrad manuscripts that we have already shared with you. The earliest Hebrew textual traditions come from 3rd BC to 1st AD. Now, what we are saying here is that if you are to trace the history, the development of the Hebrew text, how the text was copied and passed on from one generation to another, the earliest copy that we can find comes to us from 3rd century BC to 1st century AD. There were more than 4 traditions used in this period because Qumran Hebrew text shares some resemblances with the MT Masoretic text, the LXX Septuagint, and the Samaritan Pentateuch. And the New Testament sometimes quoted unique traditions. When we say traditions here, we are looking at the copies of the Old Testament. So you have one copy, another copy, another copy, another copy, and so you have 4 different copies of the Old Testament. And you can see that there are some similarities among the 4. And that's why the Qumran Hebrew text, because the Qumran Hebrew text, the manuscripts from the Judean desert are the manuscripts that are the earliest copies that we have. And so when you compare those manuscripts with the Masoretic texts that were prepared in the medieval period, 500 and 1000, you can see some similarities. The same with the LXS, similarities, Samaritan similarities. And sometimes the New Testament also quotes other copies that are not found in the Qumran text. So you can see similarities and differences. That's the point you are making. So you can see that we have different copies, about 4 of them. Copy 1, copy 2, copy 3, copy 4. Notably, in the 1st century AD, the tradition that the MT, the Masoretic text, used began to displace the others as the received textual tradition. So the 4 copies, the 4 branches of the original as as people were using the Hebrew text, copying and translating from the Hebrew text, gradually one copy became the standard. And so they could all trace to the original, and the rest were dropped. So the Masoretic text, in other words, the text that the Hebrew text that was prepared during the medieval period, that is AD 500 to 1000, that text became the received textual tradition, the text that was considered as close to the original text. Principles of textual criticism of the OT, that is how to establish original wording of the Old Testament. It is often assumed that the MT, the Masoretic text, is the best edition. So the Bible we have today, Hebrew Bible we have today, is based on the MT. And MT, as we have said, the copy we have is the Leningrad copy now kept in Russia. When there are variant readings, we compare the MT text with the Qumran manuscript and other Hebrew manuscripts and the versions. Sometimes when the comparison does not yield the result we want, we conjecture or assume what we think should be close to the original writing. The understanding in scholarship is that the Masoretic text, the text prepared between AD 500 and 1000, is close to the original text. That is the assumption. And that text is what we are using today for your translations and for all the versions you have in your language. So now let's look at a practical application of what we are trying to do. That is to establish the original wording of the text. The difficulty here is that 1 Samuel chapter 13 verse 1, NIV says that Saul was 30 years old when he became king. The NAS says that Saul was 40 years old when he began to reign. The NKJV says that Saul reigned 1 year, and when he had reigned 2 years over Israel. And so the difficulty is that what did the author write? And that is the difficulty that translators are trying to address. Now, the only way to solve this problem is to compare what is in the Hebrew text and compare what the LXS, the Septuagint, also has, and compare with other Greek versions and other Aramaic, Syriac, versions, and also what we can find from the Qumran community or the manuscripts from the Judean desert. When you compare, now we will see that, okay, 2 or 3 seem to agree. Then one can say, oh, okay, then this should be the original text or original wording. If you don't have any agreement, then it means that the text is difficult. Then one has to assume and also accept the limitation that we can never know what the author really wrote. And so that's how you go about this whole issue. And so you see the difficulty that this text presents. That's why you have these translations giving different renderings. Now let's look at the New Testament. New Testament was first written in Greek. There are also versions in Latin, Syriac, and Coptic. There are earlier manuscripts which help the determination of the exact wording of the original writing quite possible. Now, sources of textual information. So for you to determine which text is close to original, you must look at sources of information that you can use. So first source of textual information is a Greek manuscript. And the Greek manuscripts is the manuscripts that were prepared on papyrus, and they use capital letters. So we call them uncials, capital letters, to prepare them. And so in your Greek Bible, you see a letter P, and up there, up is just a super, above, or let's say up in front of the P, a number is written there. So when you see that number, it should tell you that this manuscript is uncial, a manuscript that was prepared in capital letters on papyrus. The writing material was papyrus. And this manuscript, that is P manuscript here, was prepared between 2nd and 3rd century. So it's quite early. the second one is what we call the parchment. So the second one was manuscript that was prepared with animal skin. So parchment is the animal skin. So they use animal skin to prepare or to copy the original text. And this preparation happened between 3rd and 11th centuries. And this is how you locate it or you identify in the Greek Bible. You see a capital letter like A, capital letter, or B, capital letter. When you see that, it means that this document is a manuscript that can be dated between 3rd and 11th century. Or sometimes you see a number, and the number is preceded by 0. So when you see any number preceded by 0, think about parchment, think about capital letters, think about between 3rd and 11th century manuscripts. C is more than 2,800 minuscule, that's small letters, manuscripts, dated from 9th century onwards, designated by numerals, that's 1, 2, 3, up to 1,000. Less valuable than uncial manuscripts. So we have manuscripts that were prepared, okay, with parchment, animal skin, and prepared also in small letters. And this is how you identify them, by looking at numbers, just numerals, 1, 2, 3. So there's no 0 preceding the numeral or the number. Just one, just naked 1, 2, 3, just like that. And it's less valuable than uncials because they were prepared much, later dates, from 9th century onwards. So much, late. And we have about 2,300 lectionaries dated from 6th century and beyond, designated by a numeral preceded by an italic L. That's L69. It means that we have about 2,300. So L means lectionary, and lectionary is the reflections of church fathers in their writings. Then they cited or quoted New Testament texts. So those quotations from the New Testament in their reflections, in their sermons, these sermons and reflections, and they have New Testament passages. These lectionaries can also be used as a source to establish the exact wording of the original text. And so they are identified as L, italics, L, italic L, and then the number, lectionary 1 or 2, 3, 4, 5, also as superscript, up there. The number is up there. It's a superscript. The next source is the New Testament versions. We have several versions. Latin, Syriac versions dated 2nd century, that's AD. We have Coptic translation, also dated 3rd century. Some of the versions are dated much earlier than most Greek versions, so we must pay attention to versions. The next source is what we call the New Testament patristic quotations, church fathers quotations. So we have Irenaeus of Lyons in France, around 180. He ministered. Clement of Alexandria in Egypt, 190 to 200. Tertullian of Carthage in North Africa, 200 to 220. These writers are earlier than most of the Greek manuscripts, hence valuable. So these church fathers quoted the New Testament, and these quotations can be used also to establish the exact wording of the author. If we find that these church fathers quoted a particular passage and they were all in agreement in their quotation, one can say that as early as 180, this is how the text read, and therefore what we have here is original or it's not original. And so they are valuable and that we can consider them. Now, the history of the text of the New Testament. The New Testament authors wrote with hands, and the text was copied with hands. And so in the order of production, the New Testament text was copied in Rome and was used in Italy, in France, and North Africa. And the process of copying happened between 2nd and 3rd centuries AD. And so we call the text that was prepared in Rome Western text type. The second one is called Alexandrian text type because the text was prepared in Alexandria, Egypt, and was, prepared around the mid-4th century. The third one is Byzantine text type. This text type combined different texts from Western text type and Alexandrian text type, and it was prepared in Antioch. And that's Antioch in Syria, and later on brought to Constantinople and dated around 4th century. The fourth one is called the Caesarean text type. This text type combines different text types from Byzantine, from Alexandrian, from Western text type. And this text type was prepared around 3rd century. Now, the printed text. So we have looked at the handwritten text. The printed text, as far as we know, we have what we call the Complutensian Polyglot Bible, printed in 1514 and published in 1521. We have Erasmus published, Greek Bible, which was based on the Byzantine text and remained a standard till 1831. And then in 1831, Karl Lackmark rejected the Erasmus Greek New Testament and produced a critical text. Between 1841 and 1872, Konstantin von Tischendorf published 8 critical editions of the Greek New Testament. Between 1857 and 1872, S.P. Tregels produced 1 edition, and B.F. Westcott and F.J.A. Hott, in their first volume, published a critical text based on Alexandrian texts dated 4th century. Now, the Alexandrian text that Westcott and Hott based their tests or based their preparation on, or their publication on, comes from 2 different manuscripts. One is called Sinaiticus, the other one is called Vaticanus. So these 2 different manuscripts were used to prepare the New Testament text that we have today. In their second volume, Westcott and Hott explained that the Alexandrian text was superior to the Byzantine text. They argued that the Byzantine text was inferior because the readings are a conflation of 2 or more different readings, and no Christian writers used the text, that is the Byzantine text, before AD 325. So before AD 325, the Byzantine text type was not there and nobody used that. So how come the Byzantine text type became the popular one that the church used, in the 4th century and beyond? The United Bible Society's Greek New Testament, 4th edition, 1993, and the Nestle Aland Novum Testamentum Grace, that is the 27th edition, 1993, were published. And today, these are the texts that we have been using to do our translations into different languages. These 2 contain the same text but have different apparatuses. Apparatuses refer to the notes that you see beneath the texts in the Greek. The UBS, that's United Bible Society edition, contains about 1450, in other words, 1,450 different readings in the apparatus and gives more evidence. The Nestle Aland contains about 11,500 different readings in its apparatus and gives less evidence than the UBS edition. The content for both is the same, the content. The difference is the apparatus, what they have in the notes that, should guide one to establish the text. The manuscripts that are there supporting each reading in the Greek text. And so that is the difference. The difference is the evidence that they provide in the apparatus. Principles of textual criticism of the New Testament. We follow the rational or moderate criticism, which assumes the superiority of the Alexandrian text type and that it is the nearest to the original because of how it was prepared in Alexandria. This method considers both the external and internal evidence. The external evidence refers to textual witnesses. Textual witnesses here, we are looking at manuscripts that support a particular reading, particular text. So the external evidence refers to textual witnesses, as we have said. We want to repeat ourselves here. Now, preference is given to any reading or variant reading with earliest dating, the most geographical distribution, and the most Alexandrian text type attestation supported by some Western text type witnesses or witness. And so if you have a particular text in the Bible, that's the Greek text, and the text is supported by Alexandrian text type, that's manuscripts, and you also have some Western manuscripts also supporting the same reading or text or word, that means that that particular word is close to original or is original. Now, the internal evidence focuses on transcriptional probabilities, which is what the scribe did while copying, and the intrinsic probabilities, which is what the author wrote. And I think we have mentioned this in our earlier presentation, so we can refer to that. Principles of textual criticism of the New Testament. External evidence. Here, we are looking at the preferences. Preference is given to the earlier the dating of the supporting manuscript, the closer the reading to the original. And so, if the manuscript supporting a reading have earlier dates, then we consider the reading to be close to original. The wider the geographical spread of the supporting manuscripts, the closer the reading to the original. If the manuscripts supporting a particular reading come from different geographical areas, then one can understand that this reading was considered universal then, and therefore closer to original. The quality of text types supporting a reading, the closer the reading to the original. Meaning, if the manuscripts supporting a reading come from Alexandria first, Western second, Byzantine, and Caesarea in this order, it means that the reading had a wider support, and in terms of quality, it's also is it's good, and therefore it's close to original. We look at internal evidence. A shorter reading is to be preferred to a longer reading because scribes tend to lengthen their rendering. A reading different from its parallel is to be preferred because scribes tend to harmonize the text when they feel that a different reading will distort the different reading distorts the flow. So they tend to harmonize the text. And so if you have a different reading from its parallels, that is other readings in the apparatus, you go for the one that is unique. And also a difficult reading is to be preferred to an easy one. Sometimes when scribes see that a particular word will cause a difficulty for the readers, they will tend to replace it with the easy one. Now, a reading that best explains the origin of the others is most likely the original. A reading that is difficult, a reading that is different, will make a scribe to look for a replacement, a smooth one, an easy one, and therefore you go for a reading that explains why the other variants were invented. Consideration is given to the author's grammar, style, vocabulary, theology, and purpose of writing. This is important because you must know the style of the author. If this is the style of the author, it means that this is the word he has used. And therefore, if there are other readings that you think do not fit the author's way of writing, you don't consider them. But if you see that this particular word fits the author's way of writing, then you can consider that word as original. So let's look at an example here. The NIV reads John chapter 7 verse 8. You go to the festival. I am not going up to this festival because my time has not yet fully come. ISV reads, go up to the festival yourselves. I'm not going to this festival yet because my time hasn't fully come yet. NKJV, you go up to this feast. I am not yet going up to this feast, for my time has not yet fully come. Now the difference is the word yet in the second line. I am not going up to this feast. Some manuscripts have yet, and that's why ISV and NKJV have translated this verse the way that you have translated it, by adding yet. When you look at the external evidence, that's the manuscript supporting the NIV, rendering, which is in the Greek. In the Greek text, there's no yet there in the text, but in the apparatus, some manuscripts have yet, as I've already explained. And the manuscripts that do not have yet, that support the text we have in the text, have earlier dates. In other words, they were prepared earlier. And also, they have wider geographical distribution. They come from different areas. And the text quality also is good because we have Alexandrian manuscripts, Western manuscripts supporting this NIV rendering. So that is the external evidence. Now the internal evidence is that you look at the text, you read the text carefully and see if the author indeed wrote without the word yet. Now when you read carefully, you will see that the brothers asked Jesus to go to Jerusalem publicly and show himself. And Jesus said that I am not going to the feast. Later on, verse 9, Jesus went secretly, meaning he did not comply with the request of his brothers that he should go publicly. So when Jesus says, I am not going up to this feast, he meant publicly. I am not going publicly as you have requested me to do. And so verse 9 is, says that Jesus went to the feast secretly. It means that there's no need to have yet here to make the sense complete. And so the manuscripts that have yet were trying to, in other words, the scribes who added yet were trying to help Jesus to look good. Because if you don't read carefully, you might think that Jesus lied in verse 9. And so that is it. Now we look at the last section of part 2. Translations and hermeneutics. This is true. The task of translating lies at the heart of hermeneutics. We must understand that the act of translating is interpretation. Today, the Bible has been translated into many languages. Because the English translations are in abundance, we trace their beginnings and growth. Early translations. Early English translations. The Vulgate, the Latin Bible translated by Jerome and completed by other translators in AD 405, became the main Bible used in the English church. Bishop Aldem of Sherborne, 700, translated Psalms into English. Venerable Verde translated parts of the Bible for the less educated clergy. John Wycliffe, together with John Purvey and Nicholas of Hereford, published Wycliffe Bible, a translation of the Latin text. The second edition was published by John Purvey in 1396. Purvey focuses on the meaning of sentence, not the words, for his translation. In 1408, Nicholas and Purvey were forced to recant their work because they did not seek the church's approval. See Century Translations. William Tyndale translated the New Testament in English in 1525. His translation was based on Erasmus' Greek text in 1516, and we mentioned that Erasmus' Greek text was based on Byzantine text, which was considered inferior by Westcott and Hort, if you remember that. In 1534, a revision of Tyndale's work appeared. While translating portions of the Old Testament, Tyndale was executed in 1536 for translating the Bible. Miles Covendell produced the first complete English Bible, 1535. The Covendell Bible used Tyndale's New Testament and German and Latin versions of the Old Testament as a reference for completing the Old Testament translation. Covendell Bible was the first to remove the apocryphal books from the Old Testament and put them in the appendix. In 1537, John Rogers, a close friend of Tyndale, used the name Thomas Matthew and produced the first English Bible to bear a royal license called the Matthew Bible. Covendell was in charge of the revision of the Matthew Bible, which became the Great Bible in 1539. Copies were placed in every English church, but the increasing disputes made King Henry VIII restrict access to the Bible. Queen Mary Tudor, who was a Catholic, stopped Bible translation in England for her Catholic faith. The Geneva Bible was produced in England by the Geneva Exiles in 1560 and became superior to English translation. Archbishop Matthew Parker oversaw the revision of the Great Bible, which later on became known as Bishop's Bible 1568 in response to the Geneva Bible Appendix. King James I authorized the revision of Bishop's Bible, which led to the translation of the authorized version of King James Bible, which was published in 1611, relied on previous translations of Tyndale. So the King James Bible was made, and it was based on the Tyndale's translation, and we know the text that Tyndale also used. Now, 54 scholars worked on this translation in 3 themes: the Old Testament, New Testament, and Apocrypha. By the late 19th century, the first major revision of the King James Bible took place and resulted in the Revised Version edition of 1881 to 1885. Why was this revision necessary? That's a question I want you to think about. After the King James Bible was revised, the door opened for translation of many English Bibles. There are 2 kinds of translations, and I want you to note here: translation of a committee of scholars and a translation of an individual. Now, modern translations. The following are revisions of previous translations: the Revised Version, the American Standard Version, the New American Standard Bible, the Revised Standard Version, the New Revised Standard Version, the New King James Version, have also improved on earlier versions. Now, there are new translations that focus on translating the biblical languages into the English afresh. And here we are looking at the New English Bible, the New International Version, the Jerusalem Bible. Note here that both of these revised and new translations were done by a committee of scholars. There are modern individual translations. We have Edgar Goodspeed translation, the New Testament, an American translation, J.B. Phillips' New Testament in modern English, and William Barclay's New Testament, a new translation. Evaluating translations. First thing to do is to identify the translators and know their qualifications. We have established that it is best to use a Bible translation that was done by a committee of scholars, but you must know their identity, their qualifications. Second thing also is to know the underlying textual basis of the translation. Try to find out, and this is always clear in the preface of any translation, any Bible. The translators will let you know that their translation was based on the Hebrew text, and the Hebrew text they will mention, the Leningrad. If it's Greek, they will tell you that it's based on the Alexandrian text. And so try to read the preface to appreciate the underlying textual basis of the translation. C is that you should know the theory of translation used by the translators. This is important because there are basically two, or let's say three theories. First one is what we call the formal equivalence. Here, the translator renders the literal meaning of the original language in the receptor language. So it is word by word or word for word translation. And here, the King James Version is very good because it translates the Greek or the Hebrew word for word. The RSV is the same. Now, the second theory of translation is what we call dynamic equivalence. Here, the translator emphasizes the content of the message of the text rather than word by word approach or word for word approach. And so the translator summarizes the content, the message only. And here the NIV belongs to this or uses this theory of translation. D, or the fourth thing you must do as you evaluate a translation is the question of paraphrases should be noted so that you see that some versions use paraphrases. They try to make the text relevant to modern readers or contemporary readers by paraphrasing the message in the idioms, the day-to-day usage of the English language so that the modern reader can understand. Try to appreciate also the nature of the English language used in the translation as you do the evaluation. So appreciate that and you do well and understand the text better. Now, how to help someone to choose a translation? A, translation produced by committees of recognized scholars. So these are the examples that I can give you. KJV, ASV, RSV, NIV, JB, and the rest. They were done by a committee of scholars. Also, use translations reflecting a variety of theories. So we have the dynamic, we have the formal, equivalence. Also, so see if you can read translations that that use both. Of course, each version has its own theory, so you can read both so that you can understand whatever you are reading well. Compare a wide range of translations to appreciate the different interpretations given to a particular passage. Like I said, translation is an interpretation, and therefore try to compare all the time different versions to appreciate how they render or translate a particular passage that you are interested in. D is to begin with your favorite major translation and read the text several times in context. Read the same text in 3 or 4 different translations to appreciate the text you are reading. So when you do that, you can appreciate the text well, and you can also share your meanings or your understanding of the text with the world. We have come to the end of our presentation on the third phase, the authority, inspiration, and language of Scripture. In our next presentation, we are going to look at how to interpret the Bible according to its genre. And so we focus on, first, interpreting the law, legal text. How do I interpret the law in the Old Testament? How do I interpret the stories in the Old Testament? Which laws are still binding? Which laws are not binding? I know you have questions. And so we'll attempt to guide you and share some principles with you that you can use to interpret the law and also the stories in the Bible. So continue to be with us. And we know that you'll be a blessing as you share this word and this presentation with the world. If you are yet to be a member of this class, please subscribe, free of charge. You don't pay anything. Just subscribe and share with your church members the presentations we are making here, and like this page so that we know that you like what we are talking about and what we are doing here. And if you have any question, please send us your questions. We'll address them. Or you can comment in the comment section. We appreciate you so much, and we know that we are with you and you are with us, and we have one mission, that is prepare ourselves for the soon coming of Jesus Christ. Thank you very much, and see you next time. Bye-bye.
To all who believe, behold, I come quickly, mine own to receive. Hold fast till I come, the danger is great. Sleep not as do others.